All right, happy Thanksgiving to everyone. We're hoping you're having a wonderful time with family. Thank you for tuning in for part 2 of our 2-part interview with my father, John Freitas, who is a police officer with the Los Angeles Police Department as well as a homicide detective. Part 1, we talked about his experience with the Academy and working patrol in 77th Division. And in part 2, we're going to be talking specifically about his experience as a homicide detective with the LAPD. I want to remind everyone that we will be talking about some cases that may be a little bit rough for young ears. I want to thank you for joining with us. Have a happy Thanksgiving, but also wanted to give you that heads up in case you might want to listen to certain parts of this a little bit later on. Once again, thank you for joining us, and we're going to jump into the interview right now. This episode, as always, brought to you by Good Ranchers. All right, so we had a good idea of what Rampart looks like overall. What's your... You get over to Rampart, you're a detective, but you're working robbery first.
Correct.
How did you get into homicide at Rampart?
Well, one of my old partners from patrol made detective a few months before I did, and he went to Rampart, and he ended up at Rampart Homicide. And then I came up there, and he known that I had about 4.5, 5 years of homicide experience from South Bureau. And I said, yeah, I'd really like to get back into homicide. And they didn't have an opening right at that time, but he was talking to the boss about me. I had gone in and introduced myself to the boss. And about 6 months after I got there, a spot opened up, and the boss, Vito Cicoria, asked me if I was still interested in going, and I said yeah. And so they took me into the homicide unit there in June of '94, and I got in. I was assigned with a detective, Dennis Hall. And Dennis at that time had about 30 years on the job, and he was getting close to retirement. And he had just picked up a case right before I got there, and the victim was Asian, was Cambodian, and he was at a bus stop on Sunset Boulevard, and somebody drove by and shot him, and he died, and no witnesses. It was early in the morning. No witnesses. Only evidence at the scene was a single shell casing from a .45 automatic. And the kid had no gang ties that we could find.
The victim.
That was kind of a sad cultural case. I was looking. Denny had not been able to contact the family yet, and I helped him locate where the family lived, and they were from Cambodia. We found out what dialect they spoke, and we have an Asian crimes team downtown out of the administrative building. And I called them and I said, do you have anybody that speaks this dialect? And they said, yeah. So I gave them the family's phone number. I said, could you make arrangements, good time for them that we could come over and talk to them about this, see if they had any information. They said, sure. And they called back and gave us a time, and they were going to meet us over there. And we get there, and the mom has made us like cookies and has a full tea service for us, and the detective from Asian Crimes is explaining that this is just kind of a cultural thing to welcome us and everything. And we're sitting down, and they said, they basically hadn't heard anything, didn't have any information about what had happened to their son. And, we were asking, did he have any enemies, any problems with no. And then the father looks at me and then says something to the detective that's interpreting for me. And he says, he wants to know if you looked into his son's eyes when you were doing the investigation. And I had gone to the son's autopsy, and I said, I'm not really sure what he's asking. I said, yeah, I viewed your son. I saw him. And he goes, if you look in his eyes, you'll see the reflection of the person who killed him. And the detective's explaining to me that that's kind of a belief in that culture. And I said, gosh, I really wish that was true. Mm-hmm. And I remember the father looking at both the detective that's interpreting and me and just not buying it.
Yeah.
And that was a hard thing.
Yeah.
But anyway, we went on. Denny had to go on vacation, so I was kind of borrowing other detectives out of the unit to go out, and we canvassed the area around where the shooting had occurred. And we found a couple, and we were talking to them, and they had heard the shot, but they didn't see anything. And the man indicated, he goes, "Why don't you go check that kid that lives," and he pointed to a street around the corner up there. And I said, "Who is it?" He goes, "I don't know who he is, but he is a gang member, and he's responsible for a lot of stuff that happens around here." So I did a follow-up, and I kind of identified the guy, the house that he lived in, and he was a member of one of the, Rampart had a lot of small gangs, and this was a very small Hispanic gang. And I ran him up and found out that he had been contacted as a witness in a shots fired call over in Hollenbeck Division, which is East LA. And I called over there, and I had them pull that report up, and officers responded to a shots fired call, no suspects. They recovered some shell casings, and they talked to several people, and this kid ended up being one of the people that they talked to. And he basically, I don't know, I heard the shots and came outside, and then you guys showed up, and I noticed on the report that the shell casings they recovered at the scene were from a .45 automatic. So I requested my shell casing be compared to those by our Scientific Investigations Division. And subsequently, they said that all the extractor marks and the primer hit matched, that it looked like it came from the same gun. So I got another detective in my office to go out with me, and there was a restaurant across the street from where this guy lived, kind of catty corner from where the murder had occurred, and it had valet parking. And so I went over there and interviewed a bunch of the guys, and they were a little standoffish, didn't want to talk to us. And then one finally took us aside and said he was working that night. He had heard the shot, and he saw a guy running from where the shot was around the corner, and he was carrying a gun. Mm-hmm. And he describes this guy running into the house where my first witness said, "Why don't you check on that guy?"
Yeah.
And so I had him connected to my shooting as far as someone seeing him run from the area of the shooting immediately after the shot fired, carrying a gun. I had him contacted in another division at a shots fired where the shell casings from that shots fired matched my shots fired in there. So I went and got search warrants for the house there, which ended up being his grandmother's house, and another house where his mother lived. And we did a follow-up to those and served the search warrants, and he wasn't at either location. The second house where his mom was, I talked to her, and she said, "Well, I don't know where he's living now." I said, "Well, how do you contact him?" And she finally said, "Well, I've got a phone number." And so she gave me the phone number, and this made me look really a lot better than I was, because I knew a contact from when I was working South Bureau Homicide who was a reserve officer, and when they had deregulated the phone companies, he bought a bunch of phone numbers and had his own, phones put out in different places. But he also knew a bunch of people that had bought phone numbers and stuff. So I called him up and I said, "If I give you a number, can you tell me where it's from?" And he goes, "Yeah." He goes, as long as I know who owns the prefix and stuff. So I gave him the, he goes, "Yeah, I know who owns that." 5 minutes later, he called me back, and it turns out the guy was actually, the phone number went to the address in Hollenbeck Division over in East LA where the original shots fired was. So I went over there, and sure enough, he was at the apartment, and I was able to arrest him and got back. And the family moved, so I never got to tell the family that we that we arrested the guy that had killed their son. But that, when we were talking about get off your ass and knock on doors, that was just, you can call it luck or, whatever, but I was knocking doors on all these houses, and then one guy said, "Why don't you check on this guy? He does everything in this neighborhood that's wrong." And one thing led to another, and we always used to say it's better to be lucky than good. And
Did he get convicted?
yeah.
So let me kind of ask that too as a segue, because I know there's some other cases and whatnot. When I think there's, again, people kind of wonder what's the process for actually, you do all of this work and you still got to get a DA to file it.
Oh, yeah.
So like kind of briefly, what does that process look like once you've built your case?
Well, at this time, once you built your case and you felt you had enough to present the case to a DA and you've made your arrest, you have basically 48 hours to file. You get everything together, you get all your reports together. At this time, and I don't know what the process is now, but the Los Angeles County DA's office, when you went to file a case, they required that you bring 5 copies of your case. So a lot of it was clerical work.
Yeah.
Just making up these 5 copies to make up your package.
Yeah.
And then you went down to the DA's office because he was a gang member, I was able to file this with Hardcore Gang Unit, which is a little bit faster than going to the regular, what we call the row, and getting assigned to the deputy DA of the day, that was available to run your case by. Hardcore gangs were committed to your case. They had what we called vertical prosecution. So the deputy DA that you filed your case with followed it through preliminary hearing and into trial.
So they took it all the way through.
They took it all the way through.
So in other cases, they don't do that.
No, if you've got a case that you're going to what we call the row, in other words, and at that time, the only place you could really got vertical prosecution was hardcore gangs and up in the domestic violence unit.
Okay.
You would go to a deputy DA to try to get filing, and then if it got filed, it was passed on to another deputy DA who would handle your preliminary hearing.
Yeah.
And those guys are inundated with cases. They're running, 6-7 prelims a day.
Is preliminary, is that to determine whether or not someone gets indicted or
gets held to answer? If you go to a grand jury and a grand jury hands down an indictment, you basically skip over the preliminary hearing and you'll go directly to trial.
Okay.
Now, the thing between preliminary and hearing and trial, preliminary hearings usually happen relatively in close proximity to the time of arrest. Now, there are ways that defense attorneys may request more time to go through discovery. Yeah. And it may be continued a couple of times. I think some do it
as a tactic.
Yeah. Your witness gets tired of getting called in, but along the line, they did Prop 13, which allowed the detective to testify on behalf of the witness on the case, as long as you were only asking him questions that he had asked the witness. If they came up with something that you didn't ask, you couldn't, opine on it or give what your thoughts were. You were testifying on behalf of that witness.
What's that? So you take it over. You take it over to a DA, and again, with gangs it's all vertical. But with this other one, you take it over to the DA. They say, we're gonna take
file it.
Then it gets assigned to somebody else.
Right.
And then what determines whether or not it goes grand jury or preliminary?
The DA's office would, and that would happen at the filing time.
What's the difference between a preliminary hearing and a grand jury?
Well, the grand jury has to be convened, and it's a bunch of people, citizens of the community who have been selected to serve on the grand jury, and I think it's a year service.
Okay.
But it's a panel of them, and basically the prosecution comes in and gives their case. The defense really doesn't have a part in it.
Okay.
And then
because they're just determining whether or not this goes forward.
It's going to be held over for trial.
Okay. So then, all right. So that's the grand jury preliminary hearing. Who's involved in that?
The defense attorney, a defense attorney, a public defender, or a defense attorney, and the deputy DA that's handling the preliminary hearing. And it's very basic overview of your case, the evidence that you have.
And then a judge decides.
And then a judge decides if he's going to hold it over for trial.
Okay. So what you're saying is that as long as it was domestic violence or gangs
at that time,
you'll have a different DA decide whether or not it gets filed. You'll have another DA go to prelim, and then after prelim, you'll have a different DA actually handle the trial.
Handle the trial, exactly.
Wow.
And some of the problems that especially for like a homicide, because you're going into a preliminary hearing, and like I said, these deputy DAs, I mean, we were inundated with a lot of cases. So are they.
Yeah.
I mean, they are, like I said, they may be handling 7 different cases on a given day in preliminary, or even more.
Yeah.
And I remember showing up for one, and my partner and I went up to see the deputy DA and say, we're here on this case. And she said, did you bring the gun? And you would bring evidence to your preliminary hearing. And I just said, no, I didn't bring the gun. And she gets this panic look. You didn't bring the gun? I said, no. And I looked at my partner, and he said, we did bring the knife. and she kind of sighed, and she goes, I'm sorry. And I said, you haven't read it yet? She goes, I've read over all of them. They're all running together. And she did a good job on the prelim once we got going, but
a little bit nervous.
She was just assuming, oh, well, it's a murder. It must have been a gun.
Yeah. Wait, let me ask you a question. Between a grand jury and a preliminary hearing, was there one that you as a detective preferred?
Well, you didn't go to a lot of grand juries.
Okay.
Yeah, would I prefer that? Yeah, sure, because you just go in and basically the prosecution case. You're not cross-examined on everything.
Yeah.
I mean, the jurors can ask you questions.
Yeah.
But for them to convene a grand jury, they usually saved grand juries for something that was major, big.
Okay. Or if there's like larger implications with respect to it.
And so it wasn't something, I think I testified before the grand jury in my career twice.
Okay.
So was it preferable? Yeah, sure. It's just your case.
Yeah.
I don't know if people realize in California we have reciprocal discovery. So we have to give everything to the defense that we have in our case, but they also have to give us their witnesses and stuff so we can do investigations that way. But no, it was the city council, which was kind of funny. The entire city, we were having a lot of homicides citywide. Los Angeles, I would imagine, in the city would average around, maybe citywide, around 1,000 murders a year, may give or take some at the time that I was working. And I think we talked about 77th, their record year was 162 for the year. I don't know what the total amount for LA was that year, but that was a good percentage came from one of 18 geographical divisions. Yeah. When I worked South Bureau homicide, out of the 4 South Bureau divisions, and I think it was 93, we did 428 murders in South Bureau.
So how many cases, either at South Bureau or Rampart, how many cases were a team of detectives usually handling in a year?
The average was 16 to 24. There were variables on that.
Yeah.
A lot of times, because we would
what's like the FBI recommendation for that?
4 cases for a team of detectives per year.
And you guys were handling 16
to 24 new cases every year.
Wow.
Yeah. And to give you an idea, like at Rampart, we were running, my partner and I were running about a 72% clearance rate.
Yeah.
So you think about, you're picking up those cases, but you're also following the cases that you've already cleared, that you've taken and gotten filings on, that are going to court. And the average on a murder trial from prelim to trial was about 2 years.
Wow.
And a lot of that was keeping track of your witnesses.
Yeah.
And a lot of times we used to laugh that we spent more time looking for our witnesses than we did our suspects.
What was it like? What was it like preparing for and being on the stand when you've got like a defense attorney? Just because it seems a lot of people saw like the OJ trial, right, where essentially Cochran made the trial about the police rather than OJ, right? And what was it like having defense attorneys? Like, was that your experience? A lot of defense attorneys try to go after the police, or
no? My experience is, I would say most defense attorneys are ethical,
Yeah.
and they try your case, and they test your evidence. That's what they're supposed
Yeah,
to do.
sure.
They're supposed to give a good defense and make sure that you did the things you were supposed to do. Now, one of the things that you would have, and it was the exception, it wasn't the rule.
Yeah.
But you would have defense attorneys that were willing to imply things that maybe weren't in reality,
Yeah.
just to confuse a jury.
Yeah.
You had defense attorneys who would ask you a question expecting to get the answer that they wanted, and you knew the answer wasn't going to be, and they would start, like maybe interrupting you, or they would do the thing of, I just want yes or no.
Yeah.
And, I've looked to judges and said, Your Honor, I can't answer that question yes or no without misleading the jury.
Yeah.
Now, sometimes a judge would say, let the witness answer. A lot of times the judge might say, well, that's for the district attorney to clean up on redirect.
Yeah.
But either way, if that was the case, then the deputy district attorney, in case they weren't paying attention, they knew now, okay, I've got to go back to this on redirect. But like you would start an answer, and sometimes the defense attorney, that wasn't going the way I wanted it to, and they start interrupting you. And I've also turned to a judge and said, Your Honor, am I going to be allowed to answer?
Yeah.
And I've had judges tell the defense attorney, counselor, let the witness answer.
Yeah. Yeah.
But no, I've got to say that the majority of defense attorneys that I faced were ethical. They were officers of the court. They took their job seriously, and they weren't, trying to mislead.
Yeah.
But they were going to test your evidence and make sure, and that's what they should do. They should make sure that you're doing things the way you're supposed to.
Let me ask you another question. I think that, again, you watch the cop shows and everything else. It's the interrogation, right? It's getting somebody in the interrogation room. What's a memorable experience from getting a suspect back and, talking to them in the interrogation room? Well, first of all, is it anything like the movies make it out to be?
I guess sometimes.
Yeah.
For the most part, you're thinking, I've got, if I've arrested someone and I've brought them to the station, there is a process you have to go through.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you do advise them of their rights, their Miranda rights, and their answers determine, if you're going to be going further, or if, okay, that's it. We'll go ahead, and if you're arrested and I'm going to book you in, we'll go ahead and book you in, and then I'll take what I've got to the district attorney.
How often was?
Did people talk?
Yeah.
I would say more often than not.
Yeah.
I mean, you would get, if you got, and a lot with gang cases, you have people who have been through the system before, and they're from the get-go, I want my attorney.
Yeah.
And that's King's X.
Yeah.
It's off the table. But you also get guys that think, okay, well, I've been through the system, I'm smarter than you. I'll give you a story.
All right, we're going to take a quick break to recognize and thank our sponsor, Good Ranchers. Black Friday is coming up, and Good Ranchers is letting you take advantage of their Black Friday deals right now. If you use promo code NICK, you're going to get $15 off of your order, plus free shipping, and for a savings of almost up to, I think it's $480, you get to choose which free meat you get with your subscription. That could be top sirloin, that could be chicken breast, that could be wild-caught salmon, and it can be bacon. Bacon, the superior meat, because you can wrap all of the meats with it. So go ahead and check out Good Ranchers. Use that promo code NICK. Plus, if you don't know what to get for that person that is impossible to shop for, Good Ranchers has got you covered. They now have gift boxes that you can order. Go check those out. Once again, thank you very much to goodranchers.com. Go check them out for all of your holiday season needs coming up right now with that Black Friday deal.
It's real important, even if the guy is, feeding you a bunch of nothing.
Yeah.
Get it all down.
Yeah.
Write it down. I mean, get it on tape. And then follow up and go out and try to corroborate it. Show good faith that he gave me his alibi and I went out and shot it to hell.
Well, I remember you came up when we were going back to Iraq the second time, And we have very specific rules on who can conduct interrogations within the military, but then we also have things like what we call battlefield interviews or stuff like that, where we're just trying to get information. And you were taking us through some of the processes of how to do that effectively and things to look out for and way to phrase questions and things like that. Like, do you have like a most memorable time in the interrogation room?
Oh, probably my most memorable is when Rob and I went back to New York.
Okay.
And that suspect was El Salvadorian, Spanish speaking only. And it was actually Rob and Chuck's case from the beginning. And Rob had taken it as far as he could in Los Angeles, and he was in contact with, there were two suspects, a father and a son. The son more than the father, but he had stayed in contact with the local area family, and they came back and said they're back in Bayside, Queens, back in New York.
Yeah.
So the 111th precinct from NYPD handles that area. So Rob had called back and talked to a detective in the squad there, and he had an address, and he asked if the guy could go out and check the address for him. The guy said, "Yeah, I'll go out there." So he went out and said he door knocked it. No one's there, and came back and said, "Yeah, it looks like the apartment's empty." Okay, so Rob's still in contact with the family there. Said, "No, they're back there. I don't know. They may not be at that address anymore, but he's moving around and he's back in Bayside, Queens." So we talked to our boss and said, "Look, we're kind of at the place where we need to go back to New York and see if we can find him."
Yeah.
And our boss is looking at us and said, "Well, don't go back. You're not going back on a vacation. If you get out there and it's not looking good, come back."
Yeah.
We said, okay. So we flew out, went over to the precinct and went up to the squad room, and we met a detective named Mo Cerulli. And Mo had about 30 years on, and he was NYPD detective, 30 years. And the guy that Rob had talked to on the phone wasn't in the precinct that day. And Mo goes, "Who'd you talk to?" And Rob told him. He said, "Oh." So Mo leaves us. He goes into the squad sergeant's office and comes out and guy John O'Hara. I mean, typical Irish, And he goes, "Hey guys," and he introduces himself. "Come on into my office." And Mo's telling me, what you did. You got, you had one of our guys go out to the address, and he said no one's there. And he goes, and he looks at Mo. He goes, "What do you got on this week?" He goes, "I don't have anything until." He goes, "I'm going to take you off call. You go. You want to help these guys?" And Mo goes, "Yeah, sure." So, you got the address? And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Oh, that's down the street here." He goes, "Yeah, let's go over there." And we go, and the first thing we notice that there's an eviction notice on the window of the address in question, but there is a line of apartments down below that house. So Mo takes us canvassing, and we start knocking on doors. And I don't know if it's because everybody, and maybe it just be my ear, but everybody sounds the same in New York. Mo can talk to anybody.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was just kind of comical the way he, "Hi, I'm Detective Cerulli, New York City Police Department, and we're doing this, and we're looking for the people." And about the third door, we knocked on the door, and this lady answered, and she says, "Well, they used to babysit for me. And hey, do you know these people?" And she looked. We show her a picture of one of the guys we're looking for. She goes, "He looks familiar," but she goes, "One of the ladies, I still call her every once in a while to babysit for me." And she goes, "I got a number," and gave us a number. And we go back, and Mo calls a number that NYPD has available, and we find out where the number is. And we go out there and grab some people and bring them back, and they're all Spanish speaking. And Mo doesn't speak Spanish and doesn't have anyone in the squad, so we grab a patrol officer. And this is what we were talking about, using interpreters.
Yeah.
And so we sit down with this patrol officer, and he's talking to this woman, and he asks her a question, and she comes back with a pretty significant answer. And he turns to me, and he says, "She said no." And I said, "I know what no is in Spanish. It's no."
It's no.
I said, can you tell me everything she's saying? And it goes on a little bit more, and his answers to us are a lot shorter than what she's saying to him, and I'm just kind of shaking my head, and I look over in the doorway, and the station janitor is in the doorway, and he's like motioning me to come over and talk to him.
Yeah.
And so I go over there, and he says, he's not telling you everything she's saying. And I'm kind of like, well, no kidding, you know?
no fooling.
Yeah. And he goes, and he says, these people are El Salvadorian. And I said, yeah. He goes, yeah, so am I. He goes, I know some of the people that she's talking about, and their family, they have an address out on the island.
Yeah.
And out on Long Island. So I go back in and kind of shut things down, and I tell Mo what the janitor had told me, and he goes, okay. He goes, he gave you the address? I said, he goes, yeah, you and John. He goes down and talks to the sergeant again, and he goes, I want you to get a Spanish-speaking detective. I don't want an interpreter. I want And he goes, okay. He goes, I'll call over to Queensboro Homicide, see who they can get. And I can see Mo's face kind of light up. And he says, okay. He goes, this should be good. He goes, you and John are going to run out to Long Island to check that address. Rob and I will stay here. Hopefully they're going to send the guy I want him to send. Well, it was a guy named George Sanchez.
Yeah.
So John and I run out to Long Island in his car, get the address, check the address. No one's there. Talk to a couple of people, and they don't know, if they're at work or what's going on. We head back, and George is coming in the door when we get back to the precinct house. And Mo is kind of explaining to George, and we're telling him what we're doing. We've got this address to go to based on a phone number, but everybody's been Spanish speaking. He goes, okay. He goes, let's sit down. He goes, tell me about your case. And we kind of looked at him, and he goes, I want the whole story.
Yeah.
He says, I'm a Spanish-speaking investigator. I'm not an interpreter. I don't want to ask somebody a question, have them tell me something, and then me have to refer it to you to find out if they're BSing me or not.
Yeah.
So we sat down there for probably an hour and a half, went over all the intricacies of my case and who we were looking for and what we knew about them being back in New York. And we head out, and by this time it's starting to get dark.
Yeah.
This is the first day that we're on this, and we head out. We go to the babysitter's house, and she, very gracious, lets us in. Her husband's there and everything, and George is talking to her and saying we're looking for these guys, and she goes, yeah, they've been around. She goes, there's several places. I don't know the addresses. I can take you to them.
Yeah,
and it becomes evident to Rob and I that she's attracted to George. And George is kind of using it to get information. And she goes, well, I can go with you and show you these places. And I'm looking at her husband, and I'm thinking, oh, gosh, we may not get out of here alive. But anyway, she did go with us, and she, we went to several places, and now it's about 2:30 in the morning, and she takes us to another, address. And
so she's just taking you guys around all
places to places, and we're knocking on doors.
Super healthy because of muy guapo Giorgio,
I guess. But he's being very professional, and she's actually helping us, and she and George are talking to the people, and then George is relaying the information that we're getting. We get to this apartment building, and it's a security building. So I'm pushing the buttons, hoping that somebody's going to open the front door for us. And the guy comes out to his
stoop
there, and he's, what is it? And well, they can duplicate their badges, so they had given me a detective gold shield.
Yeah.
So they said, NYPD, let us in. So I go up to the door, and there's a little window in the door, and I'm looking through it, and there's a guy that looks a lot like our suspect walking towards the door, and then he sees me, and then he turns down and he goes down to the basement.
Yeah.
So the guy upstairs buzzes us in. We go in, we go down to the basement, and sure enough, there he is, and it's our guy.
Yeah.
So we don't, we're in New York. We have no jurisdiction there.
Yeah.
So the kid did speak a little bit of English, and Mo says, hold on, I'm Detective Cerulli. We'd like to take you down to the station.
Yeah.
George comes in, interprets. The guy says, okay, agrees to go down to the station with us. We don't hook him up or anything. We take him down. we get his mom to come in, and his mom sits in on this interview, and we start talking, and George is, talking to the kid, but he's also relaying what the kid is saying, and the kid is denying, he doesn't know anything about any of this, and going on, and George keeps with him, and we take a break and come out and let the mom and him get something to eat and get something to drink and everything. And George is saying, well, he says this, and I'm looking. I said, that's not it. And he goes, oh no, that was just round one. And we went back in there, and George just continued to talk to him and continued to talk to him, and the kid's looking around, and he changes his story a couple of times, and then Rob and I are throwing things out for George to say, and then the kid asks, he goes, what would I get for this? And George tells me what he says, and I said, you tell him that people that didn't do this aren't interested in what they're going to get. And George goes back and tells him, the kid kind of gets wide-eyed, and George is like, give me more, and we're saying different things. And he gives it up.
Really?
Yeah, and admits to the entire thing. And this was, he and his father were working very hard in Los Angeles and saving their money.
Yeah.
And saving it at their apartment.
Yeah.
And the kid comes home one day, and they've got a roommate, and the roommate has a narcotics problem. Kid comes home one day, and the money is gone. And the kid's asking their roommate, what happened to our money?
Yeah.
And the roommate comes up with this idea of, oh, well, the manager has a pass key. He probably came in and took it. So the kid grabs him and walks him over to the manager's office. And the manager told us, he goes, they knock on the door, and the kid goes, I'm missing a bunch of money. He says, you have a pass key and you came in and took it. And the manager goes, I don't go into your apartment unless you're there, or I announce it, or I give you a notice, or if I do go in and you're not there and it's because of an emergency, I have to notify you right away.
Yeah.
And the manager says, the kid looks at him and smiles, and he's still got a hold of the other guy. He says, don't worry about it. I don't worry about it. I know you weren't the one that went in there. And he walks the guy back, and that's the last time the victim is seen alive.
Oh, wow.
Until he's found in the apartment with multiple stab wounds and his throat's cut.
Oh, wow.
And the kid and his father have left town.
And so, he cops to all of this?
He cops to all of it, says what happened, and he said, he was in a rage, and he was mad, and the guy had ripped them off for all their money that they had saved. And he goes through stabbing the guy, and then, admits to turning him over and cutting his throat.
Wow.
So George is writing this out all longhand on a legal pad. And the mom's listening, and the mom's witness to the entire interview. And the kid agrees to sign the statement. The mom signs it as as a witness. And so we called back to Los Angeles, talked to our boss, and said, "Yeah, Vito, we got him and brought him back, and he confessed." And we're like 48 hours into this from when we started and the initial stuff, and then when we find him, and then going through the interview and everything. And so I'm writing up the report right now. I need somebody to take it over to our DA's office, file it, get a warrant, and then send us back the warrant. And then we've got to go over to Queensboro. They're going to house him at the jail here. And we've got to go over to Queens DA and do all that and figure out, if they're gonna ask him, if he wants to waive extradition and come back. Now, the one problem that we had is when we're talking to the mom, she had a lot of kids, and they were from El Salvador, where they didn't have birth certificates or anything like that, and we're trying to figure out the age of her son, and she said he's either 16 or 18. I'm not sure. Well, I told Mo, or the detective, we have to err on the side of caution. We have to treat him like a juvenile. So when I sent it back, they were going to take it to the juvenile DA and file it for juvenile court and everything. And Mo goes, okay, well, about this time, it's about 10:30 at night on the second day and everything. And Mo says, let me call my friend over at Queensboro DA. We can book him in at the Queens jail.
Yeah.
Because in New York, you commit a murder at 16, you're treated like an adult, and they will certify you down to juvenile court if there's some extenuating circumstances.
Yeah.
Where in California, we may try to certify you up to adult court based on the circumstances of the case. So he said, we can book him here in our adult jail. Okay. So Mo makes a call, says, yeah, he's going to meet us over at the Queen's office. He said he should be there by about midnight. So we drive down. Mo calls, and each borough has its own district attorney.
Okay.
The guy that Mo calls is the district attorney for Queensboro.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It took him away from a dinner that he was at with like the mayor and the other DAs.
Yeah.
And the guy, Mo Cerulli needs me. I'll be right there. So we walk in, and older gentleman, very gracious, and he goes, yeah, Mo, I was with the mayor, and what do you guys got? And we explain it to him, and he says, okay. And he says, and you guys have to treat him as a juvenile. And I said, yeah. I said, okay. He says, I'll put this on the docket at this court for tomorrow. We'll come in, we'll explain to the judge what we've got. The judge will ask him if he wants to waive extradition. As long as he waives extradition, you're good to go. We'll house him until you get your return flight, and then, you guys are good. And he goes, now, if he refuses to waive extradition, since you guys are handling him as a juvenile, I'll take him over to juvenile court where he doesn't get the right to waive or deny extradition, and we'll give him to you that way. Okay.
Yeah.
And he says, and that he goes,
And you guys get him back to LA?
Yeah. No, the next day we show up at the court.
Yeah.
And I know you don't know what our calendar courts were like in Los Angeles, but they were a big room, and there might be 100 people in that room.
Yeah.
And that's what this court's like. But in New York, everybody's allowed to speak no matter what part of the trial or hearing is going on. Everyone's allowed to talk. So everyone in the galley is talking. And the DA comes out, and then the judge takes the stand, and there's a public defender that's been assigned to handle our guy through this hearing. And the judge makes comment that the Queensboro DA is the DA that's standing up there. He goes, well, I haven't seen you in the court for a long time. He goes, yeah, Your Honor. And he says, I have 2 detectives here from the Los Angeles Police Department, and you could have heard a pin drop. And everybody's like, you gotta, at the time that we're back there, the OJ trial is going on.
Oh, okay.
So they heard LAPD, and they're like, and so, he asked, and the public defender had an interpreter there, and the interpreter's about extradition. The kid agrees to waive extradition. Yeah. And they said, okay. He said, we're going to house him. You detectives have to arrange for some travel, I understand. Went to the defense attorney. Do you have anything else? And you know how you stereotype somebody? Younger woman, stockings and Birkenstocks, round glasses, and I stereotypically made her, okay, she's not going to be a fan of the police. And she said, I just want the officers to know that, although I'm not going to be counsel in Los Angeles, he does have counsel. If they have any more questions for him, that he's under attorney's advice not to answer any more questions. And I understood she meant the case, but yeah. And the judge says, detectives, do you understand that? And I said, yeah. So we all went back into the lockup with him, and she went back there with her interpreter. And when we went through the door, she completely changed, and she was just all nice. She goes, do you guys need me to ask him anything for the travels? And I said, well, just, explain to him that we're going to arrange for our flight. Hopefully it'll be tomorrow, the next day at the latest. Yeah. It's a long flight. Is there anything that he can't eat or drink, or that we need to stay away from? And she had her interpreter, and she goes, nope. She says he's fine with whatever they have, and he understands, and he'll be with you. And anything else? I said, no, thanks. It's just as nice as everybody, just nice.
So did he get second degree?
No, he got first degree murder.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because
he walked her over and then walked him back.
And just he had plenty of time to form intent. Yeah, yeah. And what was funny was the DA did not want to file this case, and the detectives that went over for us to file it, they talked her into filing it.
Yeah.
And then when we got him back, based on the warrant, we had to go back in and talk to her, and she said, this is a loser.
With a confession?
With a confession, yeah. She said there's a self-defense issue because the victim had taken the Bosselwood coat rack out of the closet to defend himself. And I said, and that justified the suspect stabbing him numerous times and then rolling him over and cutting his throat? Yeah. Well, I just think that the defense attorney could bring that up. Oh, great. So when we finally got to trial, we actually arranged for Mo and George to fly out for the trial.
Yeah.
And they assigned a brand new deputy district attorney to it. And his name was Hoon Chun. And he came into it saying, everybody tells me that this is a loser. I'm just going to lose it. And we said, no, Hoon, it's not. It's a good case. And the Mo and George are both said, it's a good case. You're going to be fine.
He essentially confessed to doing it.
Listen to your detectives.
Yeah.
And I mean, the confession was in front of his mom. His mom witnessed it.
Yeah.
He signed it. There was no duress. There was nothing that you could even, point to as questionable. And we got into it, and after a day or two of testifying, and then Mo taking the stand, and Mo was great on the stand because, they talked about when we found him at the apartment building.
Yeah.
And when we initially asked him his name, he lied about his name.
Yeah.
And the defense attorney, which she was trying to hang her hat on, was, well, you placed him under arrest there. And Mo goes, no, the detectives did not have a warrant for him. I didn't have cause to arrest him. I asked him if he would come back to the station and talk to us. And she said, well, he lied to you. And Mo goes, yeah. And she goes, well, lying to a police officer. And Mo looks at her and goes, that's against the law here? And she said, well, yes, false information to a police officer. He goes, I'd have half the city of New York behind bars if that was the law back there. And he was just so good on the stand, and just very. And then George, of course, was impeccable on the stand. And Rob and I testified to our little parts in it and everything. And we went through everything, and it's juvenile court.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's a court decision. It wasn't a jury trial, and judge comes back guilty, first-degree murder.
Wow.
And Mo and George both looked at Hoon and said, told you so.
Yeah.
Trust your detectives.
Yeah.
But I said, Hoon told us later when he went back to the office, he was just so excited. Because they sent him out. He was brand new in the office, so they sent him out there thinking that he's going to fail.
Yeah.
And it was good, and it was good. It was a good ending for the case, and we actually, Mo followed up when he went back to New York and got a hold of the father, and the kid had said my dad didn't know about this. I mean, he brought me back to New York, and technically, I guess you could go for accessory after the fact, but the father was cooperative, came in, gave Mo a statement, things that his son had told him, and Mo had somebody take a Polaroid of him and the dad at the table, and the dad shaking his hand. And,
wow.
They treated us very well back there, and good guys to work with.
All right, so I guess the last one I wanted to ask you about, and this, I mean, and the reason why I'm going to ask about it is because I remember from your retirement. And at retirement, it was something where it was the only time anybody could remember. It was funny. They typical police officers, they said it's the only time we can ever remember an ex-wife and a victim's family showing up to a retirement. And that was, I think that was one of the last major homicides.
Yeah, it was probably, I've been one of two primary detectives on about 200 homicides. The other one we talked about, the 12-year-old.
Yeah.
That became the second worst case I'd ever handled. This one was the worst.
Yeah. And
by happenstance, I was filling in for a detective that was on vacation with her partner. And it was a Sunday. morning, and we got the call, and it was a triple homicide in Rampart. And when we got to the scene, it was at an old Victorian style house that the family was remodeling, and the circumstances that we got was the victims were a mother and two of her children, and the mother victim's mother lived across the street in another house, and the victim's sister and brother-in-law were also there, and we're still very close friends. But we go in to do our investigation, and it's a big house, 2-story house, and the mom is down in the kitchen and multiple stab wounds, and then the two little girls are in a downstairs room, which was where they would watch TV, and they were lying on a blanket, and they each had multiple stab wounds, and they had apparently fallen asleep the night before, and the mom just left them there on the blanket. And while we're doing the crime scene, the victim's sister comes out, and we had done a canvas, and we had found a point of entry on the side of the house, and we were having detectives help us with the canvassing and talking to witnesses. There was a 2-story apartment building next door to this house, and they found a guy on the second floor who woke up the night before and heard somebody downstairs, and he looked out and he saw this guy going through the window, and he said, I even called out to him, and the guy turned around and said, "Hey, I live here." And he recognized the person as being the husband of the mother victim. And so he didn't think anything. Yeah, he does live there, and didn't think anything. Well, what had turned out is they were estranged. The husband had moved away, but he had been there earlier in the day, and the sister had been there too. And the husband apparently was using narcotics. He had a past, and that day the mom told him, "That's it. We're going to get a divorce. I'm done with you and your antics," and basically sent him off. So, we had narrowed in. Our suspect is the estranged husband. Nobody knew where he was living at the time. We're doing the crime scene. The sister comes out and says the husband just called over to the mom's house. And the sister and this family is just remarkable all the way around. But the sister maintained her composure and said, and called him by name. "Hey, what are you doing?" And he says, "Oh, nothing. You're over at Mom's house." She goes, "Yeah, I'm visiting over here." And she just acted like, nothing had happened. And "What are you doing?" And he said, "Well, I've got Melanie. We're going to go to Colorado and see my mom." And she goes, "Oh, that's cool. If you get a chance, bring Melanie by so I can say goodbye." And this
Melanie was the third daughter?
The third daughter from the house. So they come out and tell me that he'd called. So I tell the detective I'm working with, I'm going to call Detective Headquarters Division and have them put a trap on their phone just in case, in this circumstance, we can do that. And in case he calls back, see if we can get a location on him. Well, the sister's husband came out, and he's standing in the street, and I'm in the car, and I'm on the radio talking to, Detective Headquarters Division on a tactical frequency and asking them to put a trap on this number. We're doing a homicide investigation. We have an outstanding victim, female victim, possibly kidnapped. We need to find out where this guy's calling from. And while they're doing that, I look up at the husband, and he's looking down the street, and he says, "There he is." And I get out of the car, and he's pointing to this white car that is now stopped way at the far end of the block next to a park that's there. And I can see the guy get out, and he goes around, and he picks up the little girl out of the passenger side, and he starts to walk into the park. Now, you've got to imagine this scene in front of the house is a big van from Scientific Investigations, a bunch of black and whites, yellow crime scene tape, and a bunch of detective personnel standing around. So I tell one of the patrol officers, said, get in your car, go around to Toberman Park and cut off. And I take off running after the guy. Vito takes off after me, and I get to the park, and it's a Sunday afternoon by this time, and it's full of families. There's like 3 or 4 soccer games going on. And the only thing that saved me was everybody there was about my height or less, and the father is about 6'3". So I can see him, and he's still carrying the little girl. So I take off running through the soccer games, and Vito's following me, and I get to him, and he finally stops, and he turns around, and I said, and I was at low ready, and I said, put her down. Well, unbeknownst to me, the brother-in-law had also followed us. So when he put her down, she ran to the brother-in-law, and he grabbed her and hugged her and walked her away. I took the suspect into custody. Black and White came around, and I patted him down and everything, and I put him in the backseat of the car. And I told the 2 officers, I said, take him back to Rampart, put him in an interview room, get his clothes from him, give him something to wear, I don't care what it is, get his clothes from him, put them in paper bags, separate them from each other. Don't say anything to him, don't advise him of his rights. If he needs to go to the bathroom or anything, go with him, watch him, write down anything he says. So they take him, and we go back, and Ron, the partner I'm working, is still working the crime scene. We end up, when we get back, the sister tells me that there's what looks like blood on the little girl. She's still in her nightgown. It looked like blood. I said, do you have something to put her in that we can collect that from you? And so they collected that and gave that to the SID personnel that was there to book into evidence and test later. And, we went back and finished our crime scene investigation, and we were probably there. We got there probably about 10 or 11 in the morning. We finished up the crime scene about 9 o'clock that night. And I remember saying to Ron, when we get back to the station, I said, I'll bet you anything he's asleep. He goes, you think so? I said, yeah. He didn't say anything. He didn't ask anything. He pulled up on the street where he knows his wife and kids live, and there's a bunch of police vehicles and crime scene tape and everything else. And when I stopped him and went to hook him up, he didn't say, what's going on at my house? Where are my kids? Where's my wife? I said, he's sleeping because he knows why he's there. He doesn't care. And we walked in, looked in the interview room. Sure enough, he's asleep on the table. And we went in to interview him, and he wasn't going to say anything. And during the thing, Ron said something, and I thought about it later, and you could construe it to like there was a survivor. And he got this look on his face, and neither one of us caught it at the time. And then we just went on, and he invoked his rights, and we shut down the interview right then. And then when I'm thinking back on it, I told Ron, I said, when you said this, and this, he got a look on his face like he was a little bit panicked, and we should have gone with that one of them survived. But, we didn't catch it in time. And come to find out, we're still working on the crime scene or on the reports and everything the next morning. We had booked him in, and I get a call from an LA County Sheriff's detective, and apparently, because of the nature of the case, it being a woman and 2 children, and it was a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old, and they named the suspect, the victim's husband, they named him. This detective calls, and he says, so you've got so-and-so? And I said, yeah. He goes, I'm getting together the reports. He goes, he did a murder here in East L.A., and it had been he was a juvenile when it happened, and it was a gang murder. And he said, he was prosecuted and convicted, went to juvenile hall and aged out at 25. And come to find out, when he aged out, he was placed in a halfway house that was up the street from where his future wife lived. And they met and ended up married and had 3 children. The reason he came back, in my opinion, he had taken one of the daughters with him. And I think when he called and the sister answered the phone and she was acting like nothing happened, he thought, that'll be my alibi. I'll come back over, let everyone say goodbye to Melanie, and then we'll go inside and, oh my God, somebody broke into the house and murdered my family. I kind of think that was his thought process. And then when he got there, he saw that, all the police were there. They knew that something was up, and he was going to go hide in the park. That case took 2 years to get to trial. It was a capital case because of the multiple murders and his prior murder conviction. His defense was, I didn't do this, but if you think I did do it, I had a cocaine problem, and it was probably a cocaine-induced psychosis. We got through the criminal case, and they found him guilty. They found true all of the special circumstances that made it a death penalty case. And then we went into the penalty phase. And he had one of his own gig buddies show up to testify as a character witness, and that he could never do anything like this. He loved his wife and children. There's no way, that he's responsible for this. And the defense attorney had gotten a psychiatrist to interview Billy, but he didn't turn it over in discovery. So he's going to call this witness, and we don't even know who the witness is or what he's going to say. And the defense attorney said, I'm only going to question him about a very narrow part of his interview. And the judge we had was just a really sharp judge. And she looked at him and said, "Counselor, that's not the way it works." He says, "You have the witness here. Turn over a copy of the doctor's report." So he hands it to the deputy DA. I'm sitting in as the investigating officer. The deputy DA hands it over to me and says, "I'm going to listen to his direct examination. You read it and see if, what I need to address." So the two little girls had multiple stab wounds. The only person that had any defense wound was the 3-year-old. And you sit there as a detective, and you're going on, and you're trying to, why would that be? And we talked to the family, and they said, well, she could be a little scrappy little girl, and so we're thinking, okay, he came in and maybe he, went to the older girl first and stabbed her first because she was older, and then the little girl woke up and maybe just saw a big shadow and jumped on him, and that's how she ended up with a cut on her hand before she was murdered. So anyway, I'm reading through this doctor's report, and on the second time he interviewed the suspect admitted to the murders and went in great detail about how they happened. That he broke in through the side window. There was a phone in the kitchen that he disabled. He basically pulled the line out of the wall. That he went upstairs, and that the mom and the daughter that he ended up taking with him were asleep in the bed. So he wakes up the mom, leaves that daughter in the bed, brings the mom down to the kitchen, and she was saying something to him, and he grabbed a knife out of the butcher block in the kitchen, grabbed her around the throat, and stabbed her in the back, took her down, stabbed her several more times. Said that as he took her down, she called his name and said, "The children." And then his statement to the doctor was, "I knew that meant she wanted me to kill the kids." So I went into the downstairs room where the two, and she goes, "I stabbed the older one, and then I stabbed the younger one." And I was walking out the door, and I could hear the younger one still crying. So I went back in and I stabbed her some more. Well, he hid the knife in the trash can in the kitchen, and we found that during the crime scene. So the defense attorney hasn't gone into any of this during his direct examination. But he did have the doctor talk that his opinion was that the defendant did have a cocaine-induced psychosis. Now, this doctor that the defense attorney chose to do this He's a very reputable doctor. He's used by the prosecution as much as he's used by the defense. He's a very straight shooter. He tells the truth. He gives you his opinion, but he does not, embellish. He's not like, oh, you hired me, I'm only going to be for you. So they're finishing up, and they give us a couple of minutes because, we've just been given the discovery, and I'm telling Sherry, he confesses on their second interview, and I have her read it, and she's just, we're both incredulous because it's great detail. So she says, okay, I'm ready. So she goes into her cross-examination of the doctor, and she says, Dr. So-and-so, you've testified that you believe that he had a cocaine-induced psychosis. And he says, yes, that's correct. He goes, do you think that would lessen his ability to know the wrongfulness of his act or that what he was doing was criminal? And he goes, oh, no, not at all. He says, I'm not saying that this is a, criminal insanity, that he didn't know the wrongfulness of his act. He says, in fact, he goes, I believe when I went through the case, he had hidden the murder weapon in a trash can. That in itself shows a consciousness of guilt. No, I'm not saying that at all. She says, in fact, on your second interview with the defendant, he admitted to doing these murders, didn't he? He said, yes. She said, can you go through that? And he read that off in front of the jury. And while he's reading it off, the guy that had been his character witness was in the back row of the gallery, and he'd been mad dogging me throughout. And so I just turned around and just stared at him while the doctor's reading his buddy's confession of murdering his wife and 2 kids. So that was the penalty phase. They came back and they gave him life without parole. They would not give him the death penalty. And there was one person on the jury. The judge, of course, thanks the jury for their service and then invites them back in the chambers and said, thank you for your service. The attorneys may want to talk to you and get your feelings on how the case went, why you decided to make the decision that you did. Is there anything that they could have done differently? And the jurors come out of the judge's chambers, and they all ran over to the defense attorney and congratulated him on, what he did. And the reason that they decided life without parole would be better because the doctor had said that since he'd been in custody and away from using drugs, he was probably showing signs of some recovery. And he's going to realize what he did and have to live with that the rest of his life. Well, I knew him from investigating this. He knew what he did. He didn't care. He smiled when they gave him life without. One juror came over to us, and it was an older gentleman that was in there. And I noticed when I was testifying, because I testified about the crime scene, I got a lot of kids. There was a couple of times when I choked up. I didn't cry because I'm a man. But no, I choked up. It was a hard case for me. It was a hard case for everybody that came to the scene that day. We all talked about it. We all went home and looked at our kids. Yeah. But that man came over to the deputy, and he looked at me and my partner, and he said, what would have happened if I had hung on the penalty phase? I said, we would have redone the penalty phase. He goes, I wish I'd known that. He said, these people from the get-go, from the start of deliberation, were looking for some reason not to give him the death penalty. And he said, I'm flabbergasted after listening to that trial and hearing what happened and what he did to those little children. And I said, he'll never get out. He'll die in prison, but he's been able to move several times. At one time, they moved him to a prison that was actually closer to a family member. And I remember one of the family members calling me and saying, John, I've got a gravesite to go visit. Mm-hmm. He gets to be visited by his sister.
You said at one point, though, he did get visited by somebody in prison.
Well, no, not in prison, at county jail.
Yeah.
Apparently, when he got arrested, and like I said, it did make the news, and not a lot of cases like that made the news, but because of the children involved. And he called his fellow gang members from East L.A., and he wanted protection while he was in the county jail. And they basically said no.
Yeah.
And they even called, the family of the victims and said, we want you to know he's asked and we're not doing anything for him. And when he came to preliminary hearing the first time, he had most of his teeth knocked out. He had been beaten pretty badly in jail, and they were having to move him into protective custody and stuff. Preliminary hearing was interesting, too. We talked about interpreters.
Yeah.
The officers, or the two detectives that found the eyewitness that saw him going through the side window, they were using an interpreter. Both the detectives, were not Spanish speakers. And so we had that witness come to court, and he's on the stand, and we've got a court interpreter there. And, our deputy DA is asking him questions about, and he's talking about earlier in the day. And he said, well, earlier in the day, I had seen the man at the house, and he went to this box on the side of the house, and he was doing something there. And we didn't know what it was. And he said, and then I recognized him again that night when I saw him and saw him go through the window. And this guy felt horrible that he didn't call the police when he saw him going through the window. But he said, I'm thinking it's the husband, it's the father. He's just, locked out or whatever. And, but I went back over his statement, and I'm watching, and you can see he was going in chronological order, and he was going to talk about seeing the guy go to the box during the day, earlier in the day. And one of the detectives said, well, going back to this here, and rerouted the conversation, so that never came out. So I told Sherry, I'm going to go back over and see what the box is that he's talking about. Well, it was a phone line. And I talked to the family, and they said, well, yeah, there's a separate phone line upstairs in Monica's room. He went over that afternoon and disabled the phone line. So I came out and had photos taken of all that and let Sherry know, and wrote up a report and gave that to the defense and everything. And it was kind of interesting. The public defender he had at prelim had handled a couple of high-profile L.A. cases. She was pretty well known in the L.A. area. I can't think of her name now to save my life. But she conflicted out of this case. And you could tell at prelim she didn't like him.
Yeah.
And she didn't like the case, and she'd found that she had handled a case of another gang member from that gang, and I've conflicted out. And the poor guy that ended up with the case from the alternate public defender, his wife worked the DA's office as a deputy DA out of the domestic violence unit where we filed this case. Yeah. And so when she found out he was handling it, life at home was not happy for him. Yeah. And he's, what am I going to do? I've been assigned this case. And the case went on, the trial went on with continuances for 2 years. And then part of that time, he got sick and actually developed a flesh-eating disease. Oh, and almost died. Yeah. And we had to continue for that when he recovered and came back. So this case was not a great case. He did, I think once he saw the report from the psychiatrist, his goal in the case was to save the guy's life. Well, let me save him from death penalty.
Let me ask you one question on that. When did the interview with the psychiatrist take place before he was found guilty of murder?
Oh, yeah.
So
way before. Before we got to trial.
So wait a second. So that the defense attorney was holding on to evidence that his client
did not turn over,
that he did not turn over.
Yeah.
What happened? And nothing happened to him for that?
No.
Shouldn't that be disbarred?
I don't know if disbarred, but he knows reciprocal discovery in California. He's supposed to turn everything over of the witnesses he's going to call. And like I said, when he made the play in court, the judge told him that's not the way this goes and forced him to give.
But did the DA file a bar complaint or anything?
Not that I know of.
Wow. Well, I guess I'll. So roughly 20 years with LAPD because.
Yeah, well, after Rampart, I was taken up to robbery and homicide division. I was literally there for 4 minutes, 4 months, and then I got sick, and it took about 2.5 a little. I had over 20 when they finally said, we're retiring you, and then they made it retroactive. So it was actually at 19 and a half years.
Yeah.
But yeah. No.
What was the best part
of
being a cop?
It was my dream job. I mean, it was my dream job. I mean, working with people and working people that I got to work with. I mean, to this day, I'm still in contact with some of them, and in contact with some of them because another friend of mine, Vic, has a morning. He'll make up these funnies that he does and sends them to us, and then we all respond to them and talk back and forth. But just guys that I looked up to and idolized. Greg Beelman, Leonard Mora, guys like that, and then other guys that I worked with when they were younger policemen, and then of course Vic and Carlos. They were both at South Bureau Homicide with me and at 77th, and just guys that I looked up to as being stellar cops. And
what was the worst part?
The Maynard case was the worst part.
Did you do it all again?
Sorry.
All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, well, everybody, thank you very much for watching. We know we did a little bit different here with the Part 1 and Part 2 series. We know a lot of people got long drives, a lot of travel during this week. We hope everyone has a wonderful Thanksgiving with their family, a wonderful holiday season. Thank you very much, as always, for tuning in, for listening, for watching. We really appreciate it. We wish nothing but the best for you and your family for this holiday season. So happy Thanksgiving. And thanks again, Dad.
Thank you.
This episode, as always, brought to you by Good Ranchers.